cherubs, thank you so much for rocking up here and sitting with me and watching this witch ramble. I've seen a couple of videos lately in the community from different creators, two different creators, that kind of circle around some of the same issues, and some of the things that are addressed in the videos from each of these people kind of overlap a little bit. And both of the videos were really excellent, and I'm going to mention them and link them down below. And they really just got me thinking, and they got me circling back around to some topics that I have approached on the channel before, and just kind of reassessing where I am with those topics now, and also just thinking about other stuff that I haven't really chatted about on the channel before. I definitely feel like I also want to do some rambling witch episodes which are geared more towards talking about, you know, what I do at my altar and actually the practical nuts and bolts of things and how I do spells and that kind of stuff. And I definitely will get to that. I do want to address those more kind of logistical and practical things, definitely, rather than just doing big long opinion rambles. But there's so much that has come to me as a result of watching these two videos that I thought I'll definitely allow myself this one decadent ramble on these various different topics that have overlapped and kind of come into mind as a result of watching these two videos. So the first video is from Eclectic Witchcraft. I believe the channel owner's name is Natasha, and the video was called Competitive Witchcraft, and I thought it was really good. And it basically talked about materialism in witchcraft, and it talked about how witchcraft becoming more open and more mainstream and more visible will definitely have lent itself to a sense of competitiveness and materialism and wanting to kind of one-up each other with the stuff and all the rest of it. And I definitely have kind of addressed that topic before on the channel, so I'm just looking at all my notes now. I think what Natasha was talking about in her video is just making sure that you don't lose the essence of why you are a witch and the essence of what witchcraft is really all about, and how the tools do not maketh the witch. And really, you know, it's your energy, your intention, the way you're using your mind, the way that you're using your body that is going to really, you know, make the manifestations come into being. It's not about the stuff, it's not about the shinies. And, you know, I've made a couple of videos on witchy consumerism and the dangers of falling into that trap. I'm going to leave them down below so you can check them out if you feel like you want to hear more from me on this topic, although I am going to go into some stuff now that the video made me think about, because, you know, this is a very, very long-standing thing, isn't it? We go back and forth as a community on this issue. Sometimes the conversation comes along because someone has a bee in their bonnet and they make, you know, a video which is really kind of disparaging towards witches that show their big shiny altars full of stuff. And other times people kind of make videos which are much more like the video that Natasha has made, that I'm going to link for you guys below, which speak more to just letting witches know that they don't have to go down that road, and just basically to check themselves before they wreck themselves. And I think that that is helpful advice. I think that can come from a really pure and a really kind place, because we all can get lost sometimes, I think, in that feeling of needing what another witch has, or looking at the way somebody else's practice is set up or their stuff is set up and feeling like less than, feeling like your practice is not going to be as powerful or as potent. Just feeling straight up jealous and envious sometimes, and maybe making bad financial decisions to kind of pretty up your altar and feel like you have more things, but actually not really truly connecting that with the value of those things in your practice, and not really allowing yourself to think about whether or not it's really going to help you with your practice. So I definitely think a lot of these videos come from a really kind place and a helpful place. Some videos I've seen and blog posts I've seen come from a more judgy and disparaging place, which I feel is much more based around kind of an anger response, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not necessarily helpful, and it just tends to divide people and make people feel, you know, targeted or whatever, if they do have, you know, more tools in their practice and whatnot, or if they do tend to share more what their altars look like and stuff, they might feel like they're being kind of zoomed in on. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ways in which I have personally struggled with kind of coming into a materialistic state in my practice. And I was thinking, as I was watching Natasha's video and afterwards, about my own accountability for experiences that I've had and ways that I've got through these experiences which relate to materialism and my craft. And I think one of the key holes that I've fallen into a few times, because I've been practicing since I was 12 or 13 years old. I did like my first spell when I was 12 with my sister and another girl. So I've been doing this a long time, and there's definitely been a few times where I've undeniably fallen into this kind of hole of feeling as though buying something will reignite a practice that has gone stale for me. And I've definitely gone down that path a few times, and obviously I've always come out the other side realizing that that's not what's going to help and it's not what's going to be useful. But at the time I found myself kind of clicking add to cart on something, or going to the local witchy shop and kind of picking up some stuff, some items, because my practice has gone stale. I'm not going to the altar as much, I'm not really feeling it, and somehow I've equated buying stuff with reigniting my practice, you know, putting fuel onto the fire of my practice and kind of, you know, waking it up again kind of thing. And I definitely think that one reason we can get stuck into this kind of cycle is because it does work for a short period of time. Has anyone else found that, you know, when you do buy some things, whether you need them or not, and most of the time you don't, it's not like I'm talking about basic supply shopping here, like, oh, I've run out of candles, I've run out of tea lights, whatever, I've run out of lavender. I'm talking about buying decks, buying crystals, buying shinies, you know, buying tools that you do not necessarily need. And it's like they do give you a temporary boost. If you have not been going to your altar, or you've not been consistent, or you have been feeling a little bit lost as to what you're actually doing and what you're trying to achieve or whatever, it's undeniable that sometimes when you kind of put some new tools and some new things into, you know, altar cloths or whatever it is into the situation, you do get that little like temporary lift, you know? It's like a little temporary buzz. And it does get you back into the motions on a temporary basis, but it rarely, if ever, lasts, because it's not about the external stuff. If you're feeling stale in your practice, if you're feeling incapable or disempowered or bored of what you've been learning or practicing or researching, then that needs to come from an internal place. You know, the shift that needs to occur has got nothing to do with anything material, really. It's got to do with your insides. So yeah, I've definitely fallen into that trap before. I've definitely gone down that avenue before of buying something to kind of inject inspiration or a little bit of life into my practice if I feel like I've just been away from it for a while, or, you know, I mean, there's been a lot of different phases of my path over time. There have been times where I've strayed away and come back. There have been times where I've had slumps and inconsistencies. There have been times where I'm just not feeling what I'm doing and I'm not sure what I'm doing and I'm just feeling a little bit confused. So definitely I have gone down the road of parting with money to get something that I feel like is going to ignite the practice, and it's going to be a new area of focus and whatnot. And I think that's markedly different from introducing a new tool because I've actually got the room mentally and schedule wise to use that tool, and it's been a plan for me to use that tool. Like, for example, when I purchased my crystal ball, I really thought about that purchase long and hard. I really considered whether or not I wanted to add another divinatory tool into my system of tools that I use. I asked myself, you know, what I wanted to get specifically from working with a crystal ball, and whether or not I wanted it as a permanent fixture on my altar, because I already knew that it's not the kind of tool that I want to put away and bring out and put away and bring out. So I also wanted to really be clear with myself about how dedicated I was going to be to using the crystal ball and getting the maximum usage out of it, because I wanted to have it as a permanent fixture. So I asked myself these questions and went back and forth. I didn't just go out and buy a crystal ball. I really thought it through. And I think that kind of purchase is the right way, for me anyway, to purchase a tool. It's markedly different from, you know, just frivolously picking something up like a new deck or some new crystals or whatever, you know, some new runes or something, because I feel like I need that flutter. I feel like I need to, you know, kind of kind of give my practice an electric shock, and I'm going to buy something in order to feel like I'm doing that. I think that comes from an unhealthy place, and I've learned now after a few times of doing that it's not the way to go. And if I ever find myself sniffing around a witchy shop and I'm not really sure what the fuck I'm looking for, or I'm online and I'm looking at witchy stuff and I'm not really sure why I'm there, I always now kind of check in with myself and go, am I looking for something that really needs to be found internally and tweaked internally? And often the answer is yes, and then I just log off or I just leave the shop. So I've learned to do that over time, but it certainly wasn't always the case that I could do that. I definitely have bought things to kind of jumpstart my practice. In the videos that I made about witchy consumerism, which I've linked below for you guys, I do talk about the dangers of looking at different stuff online that might make you feel like you need to keep up and you need to have a similar setup to people that have, you know, very ostentatious setups and lots of things, or maybe a dedicated witchy room. If you don't have the room for that, then you might feel intimidated by that, or you might just wish that you could have that, and it might start to play on your mind, and it might be something that actually detracts from the joy that you're getting from your own practice. So I do think it's important for you to regulate what you are looking at online, and I've gone through things like that as well, for sure, because for a long time I did not have the room for the kind of setup that I wanted. I didn't have the stuff, I didn't have the space, and it would feel kind of crappy sometimes looking at these really flashy, really ostentatious altar setups. For me, there is nothing necessarily of value whatsoever in making a judgment of the people that do have those bigger altar setups and more things and whatnot. To me, it was never going to make sense for me to make a judgment on those people that have those things and whether or not they deserve those things, and, you know, whether or not they feel they need those things. Like, that is just all a massive waste of my energy. For me, it was much more about saying to myself, look, stop looking at this stuff because it's not going anywhere good. It's not making you feel good about what's going on with you in your practice. You know, do something. Be a witch. Witch is a verb. I think there's definitely a danger of getting sucked into this idea that more tools equal more power, and that more tools equals more proficiency. And really, you know, only a witch as an individual human being can know what their practice looks like when they're actually doing it, and what they're getting out of it, and whether or not they value their tools, and what kind of connection they have to their tools. And the bottom line is that every witch needs to practice the craft from their own place and from their kind of point of sincerity. And it's really, it really is nonsensical to sit around and make judgments on somebody else's sincerity. I like the fact that videos come out from time to time and blog posts come out from time to time where witches actually kind of reinstate the message that tools do not equal your power, and that you actually can witch with no tools whatsoever. I think it's really important that we remind ourselves of that, and I think, you know, it just in an increasingly consumerist and capitalistic society, very material, etc., etc., I think we can stand to remind ourselves of that in many different areas of life. And I think the witchcraft journey for me is one of those areas where I think it's really good that we have these discussions intermittently about how tools do not make the witch, and tools do not get the magic done. You know, tools are not the extent of the working. They aid you in the working, but they are not necessary for the completion of the working and the success of the working. So I just think that's important. And obviously there are going to be traditions that vary on this, that do place a lot of importance into a specific sacred tool or whatever, and that's fine. I'm definitely not saying that we can't look at things in an animistic way where we're looking at the spirit of a thing and, you know, its importance is elevated because of that. I place a great deal of importance in my things. I love my fucking things, you know. I wouldn't get rid of them. I don't want to part with them. I do not plan to part with them. I'm not a minimalistic witch. I am definitely more of a knickknacks, bric-a-brac and bits and pieces kind of witch, and I'm happy with that. That's what makes me happy. That's what's always made my soul sing. I like stuff. I don't want a massive amount of stuff. I don't want to be completely over the top. I don't want a needless amount of stuff, but I've collected stuff over time and I like my fucking stuff. So I'm not saying that I'm, you know, downsizing or getting rid of all of my shit or whatever, but I definitely have come to a point, and I had to come to this point and bring myself to this point over time, where I don't equate the stuff with my power and with my sincerity and with what I'm doing. It's all basically an enhancement of something that's going on in here and in here, you know? And I think that is the main thing. One thing I want to say about this intermittent kind of dialogue that we have around the importance of not being materialistic and not, you know, wanting to collect too many things for your craft and stuff, is that I definitely think that it's possible to misjudge someone who does have lots of witchy bits and pieces, or does have a dedicated room and an extensive collection of tools and all that kind of thing. A lot of people don't even buy things for themselves. They're given things as gifts, you know, and a lot of people thrift things, and just over time you do manage to get this really tasty collection of different things together. You have this inventory of tools if you've been doing it for a while. And I think if all of those things are displayed, or if they are lovingly kind of curated and exhibited and they are out and proud, I think it can definitely look like someone's got a very maybe frivolous and materialistic connection to their craft, but really they've just been doing it for a long time, and along the road they just acquire things. And some people are more prone to the acquiring of things than other people, for sure. But I definitely think people can be misjudged quite a lot of the time. Of course, I do think at the same time, though, that if you're going to put your practice out online and you're going to talk about it, you have to be prepared to be misunderstood. And that's part of the decision of starting a YouTube channel or a blog or having any kind of public presence online, particularly that's to do with your spirituality. You have to make the decision that just because you could be misunderstood, and you very possibly will be misunderstood, doesn't mean that you should not be out and proud. It doesn't mean that you should not make your voice heard or be a part of the community or any of those things. And that is a decision that one needs to reach if they are going to put out their first video or write that first blog post or get involved with the pagan Facebook groups and stuff. You have to make that decision that you could be misunderstood, and it might sting a little bit at the time, but it should not be allowed to hold you back from doing what you want to do. In Natasha's video, she said, your practice should be solely you. Your practice should be solely you. And I really liked that line. That really resonated with me. And I thought about what that actually meant for me. And I think that it led me down a road of thinking to myself, it's important to note why I'm putting out the things that I'm putting out when it comes to my own journey, my own altar, what I'm doing, what I'm up to, etc. First of all, witchy gaze is a factor, and I talk about witchy gaze as a kind of concept in the 2 videos on witchy consumerism that I've linked down below. But basically it's this effect where you are showcasing certain things about your craft to other witches, and therefore it's possible that the gaze of other witches could be an influencing factor or a deciding factor for you in various different situations with regard to what you buy, how you put things together, what you showcase online, and so on. And you have to be really careful about that, because I think that certain things can definitely become performative, or you can definitely do things in a very artfully self-conscious way in order to showcase it in a pleasing manner online, or in an interesting or innovative way online, and that takes you out of the moment of building the altar or whatever it is that you're doing. It takes you out of the moment because you are thinking about how it's going to be perceived rather than actually being in the moment doing it. So if you're crafting, if you're setting up an altar, any of those things, you want to be in the moment, flowing with that experience. You want to be putting your energy and your intention into that experience and really being one with it. And if you've got this little kind of self-surveillance bug always in the back of your mind, thinking about, like, you know, how it's going to look on the gram, then it's going to be difficult for you to really connect with that experience of making that tool or crafting that thing, or, you know, setting up that altar, because you're already thinking about how it's going to be perceived by others or how you would like it to be perceived by others. And I think that that can be quite insidious and subtle. Sometimes you just kind of have to note for yourself that that is how things are going. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the case that you are thinking 24/7 about showcasing your craft online or making YouTube videos and how things are going to look. It could literally just be as simple as you're doing something in your witchy space and you think to yourself, oh, that would make a really great photo, and then you kind of catch yourself and go, hang on a minute, I'm trying to do something here, I'm trying to be in the moment, let me just be in the moment. And that's really just a form of self-regulation, and I think that's really healthy to do. So yeah, when it comes to your practice being solely you, I think that you have to recognize the difference between kind of offering people a slice of your path, which is solely you, for the purposes of connecting with other witches or inspiring other witches, sharing more, being more open, etc. There's a big difference between that and then actually setting something up to be performative in some way, and then actually asking yourself the question, do I feel connected to this, and finding that the answer is actually no. And again, it's a self-regulation thing, isn't it? But I have definitely taken responsibility for recognizing that in putting my stuff online, in putting photos of my altar on Instagram, doing altar tours, you know, showing my stuff, and showing my, you know, showcasing my practice, talking about my practice, etc. There could be a danger of kind of allowing that to be a deciding factor or an influencing factor. And it's just really about making sure that your desire to be a part of the online community isn't writing the script for you. It's not actually writing the narrative for you. And that's just as clear and simple as it's got to be. And I don't feel like it's ever been a problem for me. But I knew right at the very beginning, if I was going to be showcasing stuff and talking about my practice, that I would have to safeguard my practice and my experience of being a witch against this performative kind of thing where I'm actually considering how things are going to look or how things are going to go over, or wanting to do things a certain way for how it's going to appear online. And I think it's easy to get stuck into that. So I just always wanted to make really sure that that wasn't what I was doing, and that I was sharing to inspire and to connect and, you know, to feel stronger in my practice and to learn from others and all that good shit. And not to be, you know, performative and kind of make this big statement and get praise for it or feel, you know, superior for it or whatever. You just got to be really careful, and you've got to be careful that whatever you're doing in your practice, if you do have an online platform, you are doing because it's what makes sense to you and not because it seems to be what's trending, or, you know, it would look good, or it would sound good, or it would sound edgy or whatever. All the edge forever. To me, that's what it means to have your practice be solely you. Just making sure that it's what you need first and it's what you want first, and if you choose to share it, then that's got to be a secondary consideration and not the primary consideration. I think that a lot of witches can find themselves going on a really inspiring, enlivening journey with themselves, where they actually kind of reassess their entire attitude towards material stuff. Because when a lot of witches first get onto the path, they are looking at altars online, they are looking at what other witches have amassed, and, you know, all the shinies and pretties and how everything is set up and how it looks. You know, witchcraft has always been an area of spirituality that lends itself very strongly to aesthetics and things, and, you know, things being collected and arranged in a certain manner, and, you know, that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of witches come onto the path, they see that stuff, and they might have a really negative response. They might feel disempowered by it. They might feel like they have to go and get this stuff. They might find themselves actually spending to try to amass things very quickly and try to get all the tools and everything like that, probably half the time before they're even ready to use those tools and work with them. I think it's better to get tools slowly but surely and work with them steadily one by one and really like forge that connection. Obviously, if you are starting out Wiccan, you're going to want to get the tools all together because you're going to want to set the altar up the way that you know, the Wiccans set their altar up, I suppose. But even with me, I started out following a Wiccan structure, and I didn't feel a pressure to have the Wiccan tools. I was like reading Wicca by Vivian Crowley and being like, okay, well, I'm 13, so I can't just go and get a chalice. I knew what was up. I didn't feel that pressure. I let myself, you know, get things slowly and use what I had. But to be honest with you, when I first started out, we didn't have this thing, this glorious, grandiose thing called social media. And I think that definitely has put a dampener on a lot of people's journeys, as well as it also being an amazing thing that's brought us all closer together and given us so much more contact with each other. And this is something that Natasha does talk about in her video, is that it's great that when she started out, she had to go and get, you know, a select few books, and now she can go online and there's blog posts and there's videos and there's different opinions from different people walking different paths that have different experiences, and that's awesome. But of course, everything has its shadow sides, everything has its downsides, and the downside with social media, I think, is sometimes almost too much access to the inner workings of other people's paths in terms of how everything is set up, you know, what they've got access to, etc. So I think it can be taken as an opportunity to have a really illuminating reassessment of your attitude towards material stuff and the need for material stuff. And I think if you can get to that point on the journey where you're over the feelings of wanting to replicate what somebody else has, or compete with somebody, or just amass tools really quickly, if you're over that kind of hump, then you've moved on into already this new state of maturity where you realise that witchcraft is not about those things. And then that can bleed out into the way that you perceive material objects in the rest of your life as well. You can realise, for example, that having a comfy, homely, domestic situation is not necessarily about stuff, it's more about energy, you know, that kind of thing. So it kind of bleeds out into other areas of your life too. I wanted to talk a little bit about competition in terms of competing with other witches for position or power, or competing with witches with regard to how much they're doing and how witchy they are, you know. So it's not so much about the material stuff, but it's kind of competing more with elements of who a witch is and feeling like you have to compete with that, or you have to one up that, or you have to replicate it, you have to imitate it. I have found that the key way to turn this around when it comes to rivalry in any area of life is to kind of flip it over, so that instead of feeling intimidated by somebody else and what they appear to be achieving or doing or whatever, I'm inspired by them. And I know it sounds like a really simple mindset shift and really obvious and kind of corny actually, but it works. It really works. It's about looking at those people and thinking, well, obviously I see the seed of that in me, because I'm sitting here envying it, because I know that it's something that I can have and it's within my grasp, and I just need to show up and start being the witch I know that I can be. And let me really look at this person as an inspiring figure for me on that journey. And it's a simple mindset shift, but it's important and it works. It is okay to recognise that you feel insecure about yourself in comparison to another witch. It's okay to recognise that you have some shadowy feelings about witches that you watch online or whatever, and how they make you feel about your practice, your spirituality, your sense of self, and what you're doing on your path. That's all okay. I would definitely never recommend suppressing those things, trying to crush them down, trying to pretend that they're not there, or being ashamed of them. I am much more inclined to look at the feelings I'm getting about someone and just be like, okay, what does this mean? How can I use this? Where can I go with this? And obviously that's so much of what I teach, and it's so much of shadow work. So it is definitely a practice that I apply in my own life. For me, it's just about being honest with myself about the fact that I do get insecure sometimes. I do get insecure about other witches, what they're doing on their path, how learned they are, you know, what they're reading, whatever. I have occasional insecurities about witches that put out content as well, as I'm sure, you know, other witches that put out content can say the same thing. I'm not saying I'm above any of that. I'm not saying that I've somehow risen to this level above those kinds of feelings. I get feelings like that. I feel insecure, and I have times where I think my work isn't, you know, as good as somebody else's or whatever. It's just, you have all of these little feelings of insecurity and weirdness and stuff at times, and for me it wouldn't be self-loving to suppress that shit. And it certainly wouldn't be self-loving to say to myself, oh, well, you know, I'm a teacher of self-love and self-acceptance and whatnot, so I really shouldn't be feeling this way about XYZ person and how their work or their kind of being reflects upon me. I don't put that kind of pressure on myself. I don't try to railroad myself like that. It's not fair on me, because I'm just human, just like everybody else, and I do have those insecurities. But what I like to do if I'm feeling insecure about a witch for any reason, with regard to how something about them reflects on me, I always just say to myself, how can I flip this so that this person is inspiring me to do what I obviously am feeling called and compelled to do. I definitely see it as a call to action for me. So normally 9 times out of 10, if I've got that insecure feeling or whatever, it's because I know I'm not showing up in the best way that I could be, or it's because I know that I feel like I'm wasting my time doing something that isn't important while this witch is doing something that I can see is really meaningful and they're really getting something from it or whatever. And it's really just about using that as an opportunity to reflect and to do any necessary shadow work, but also as an opportunity to be like, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to tweak? Let me bring this back to me and what I can actually enhance in my practice as a direct result of feeling insecure about this person. So then that person sort of becomes my muse in a way, essentially. And in the end, I'm like, hey, thanks for making me feel that weird feeling of insecurity there, because now I'm back on track doing what I know to be good and juicy and meaningful. One thing that's important for me about the stuff that I put out online is that I don't have anything to prove. I am not here to compete with any other witches or anything like that. If I have experiences of insecurity or competitiveness which come up time to time as a natural consequence of being human, I will take them away and I will deal with them. I'm not going to mete them out in my content. I'm not going to take those shadowy feelings that just need to be put on the table and confronted and addressed. I'm not going to let those feelings seep into my online content and inform my work and, you know, kind of accent what I'm doing. I definitely don't ever want that to be the case. I want to address those feelings that I'm having about that individual, but I don't want those feelings to write the story for me or dictate what kind of content I'm going to do or what my next step is going to be with the business or with anything I'm putting out. The other video that I watched was by Pagyptian and it was called Trendy Witchcraft. I think it was called Trendy Witchcraft. Hang on a minute. Yes, it's called Trendy Witchcraft, and I definitely recommend giving that a look as well. And in that video there were two main things that really came through very strongly for me. The first was the kind of intergenerational tension that takes place between the older generation of pagans and witches and then the newer generations, the younger generations, and then also the issue of witchcraft as a fashion statement and as a kind of aesthetic, and the fact that witchcraft symbolism and witchcraft kind of iconography and stuff like that and occult symbols find their way into trend pieces and they find their way into, you know, collections and fucking fast fashion and everything, everywhere, online, offline, wherever the fuck. So basically that leads you into an exploration of how you feel about that as a pagan, as a witch, and whether or not that tickles your pickle, etc. Pagyptian made the point in her video that she's noticed that there is an increasing amount of critique. The critique is directed towards the younger generation of pagans and witches, and the assumption is fairly often that the younger generation is you know, trying to stand out and kind of be unusual purposefully. There's an implication that the younger generation have this almost like frivolity and this shallowness to the practice where it's about showing everything and showing off rather than actually, I guess, diving in and going deep and actually being spiritual and doing the work, etc. And this is really interesting because I'm not actually exposed really to these kinds of views because I don't read a massive amount of pagan and witchcraft books and resources anymore, and I haven't for a long time. I'm much more interested in reading nowadays things like psychology and biography and politics, but I do want to go back to the witchy and pagan stuff. I've got a few things on the list. I definitely want to get back into it, but I haven't read anything like that for a really long time, and I don't follow, you know, any of those kinds of people. I'm not really like an academic pagan in the same way that Pagyptian very much is, and I can only love her for that. She's a constant source of information and awesome opinions and everything, but I'm not kind of in that world, if you will, that she occupies. But I do think it's really interesting because, let's face it, those people in the older generation that are getting sniffy about the newer people coming through and doing their kind of weird and wonderful box breaking kind of thing, though that older generation in turn were probably, you know, looked down upon by the generation that came before them, you know. So it's definitely like we all were movers and shakers at some time, and we all were getting firmly up the noses of the previous generation at some point or another. So it's interesting because those people that are now like writers or speakers in the community, older people, the elders if you will, that are looking at the young upstarts and being like, look at these fucking dingbats, those older generation in turn will have been doing things differently from the generation before them, and there will be like occultists and witches that were looking at them in their heyday going, these fucking kids today, Bloody fucking urchins. I literally just reminded myself then of the time where Lil Peep died, and I was like, okay, who's Lil Peep? Who the fuck's Lil Peep? Who are the kids listening to now? So I went off and listened to some Lil Peep and watched some Lil Peep interviews and stuff, and then I got plunged desperately and horrifically into this world of what I can only describe as emo rap and mumble rap. And it was, you know, I was being introduced to all these boys, Little Xan, Little Pimp, and it was just terrible. I was listening to this music, and I mean, Little Peep's music was good. I liked it, but a lot of this shit is just terrible. I was stunned. I was like, what are the kids doing? What is going on here? It was hilarious. I was properly showing my age and acting my age watching some of these videos. I was just like, this has got to go. This whole subculture, we need to kill it with fire immediately. Anyway, I just went off on a tangent there, but that's what it reminded me of. Every so often I have this look down my nose older generation situation, and it comes out of nowhere, and I catch myself doing it, and I'm like, oh my god, that's terrible. Look at me being 33 now. Fucking hell. The thing is, since the repeal of the witchcraft law, obviously, like, before the witchcraft law was repealed and after the witchcraft law was repealed, in this country anyway, you're gonna have like a generation that was mostly coming up and coming of age and getting into witchcraft before the repeal. You're going to have those people that kind of came of age as the repeal was happening and attitudes were changing and we were moving into the swinging 60s and everything. So even there, you're going to have these intergenerational tensions between people who were very much on the down low and keeping it very kind of subtle and quiet, and probably feeling that there was a great deal of respect and reverence and seriousness in that subtlety and discretion. And then they're going to be looking at the generation from like the 60s and 70s that are all like, you know, let's just all drop acid in front of a statue of Baphomet, let's just mix everything up, let's get some Kabbalah in here. And they're probably looking at that going, what the fuck is this trash fire? This is terrible. And then, you know, those people grow up and then they look at us doing a different thing, and, you know, it's just all very kind of, you're gonna find that as people get to a certain age, first of all, they feel protective of their path and the work that they've done to legitimize that path and protect it and stuff like that. And Pagyptian did go into that in her video, where she said that, you know, the whole reason that the younger generation now can be so out and proud with their witchcraft on social media is because of the older generation and the work that they put in, and the discourse that they kind of set out, and, you know, the kind of events that they put on, and slowly bringing it more into consciousness and making it okay and making it acceptable. It's really no wonder that the older generation look at the younger generation with disdain when they see the degree to which social media is used as a vehicle to share what can only seem to them to be every aspect of the spiritual journey. You're going to have people from back in the day when Wicca was just sort of Wicca and you were Alexandrian or Gardnerian, and there wasn't all these offshoots and this eclectic shizzle and all that sort of thing. And then, you know, those people from that more strict generation where it was like, look, you're from column A or column B, this is Wicca, this is what it is, you join a coven, blah blah blah. They're going to be looking at the kind of Scott Cunningham sort of generation and going, no, you're not Wiccans, you're neo-Wiccans or whatever, like, you can't be in the same category as us, this is not Wicca. So again, it's just basically more tentacles being created off of certain traditions and new ideas being accepted where they wouldn't have been accepted previously. And you know, it's the same with all kinds of movements and in all kinds of spiritual kind of concepts and practices. You've got these things that one generation holds to that the next generation kicks aside as though it's worth nothing. I find that kind of thing really interesting. Like, I remember when Raymond Buckland, not long before he died actually, said something about how witches should not be doing hexes, and they certainly shouldn't be publicising the fact that they're doing hexes. This is really just kind of undoing all of the work that he and other people kind of put in to making witchcraft legitimate and credible and protected and understood. And it's just really kind of giving witches a bad name. And I think he even said that that witches that do hexes are not real witches. And there were a lot of people when that kind of controversy happened that even if they disagreed with Raymond Buckland were being very respectful, and the tone was very reverent even in disagreement with him. And then you had all these people from the younger generation that don't give a fuck about the Big Blue Book of Witchcraft or any of that. Half of them probably didn't know who Raymond Buckland was, and the other half probably thought, look, just because you're Raymond Buckland doesn't mean you can tell me shit about anything. And their attitude was very much like, fuck this, you know, cis het privileged, you know, women shaming crap. Like, don't tell women how to deal with their feelings in sacred space or whatever. And then there's these older people that are like, it's Raymond Buckland, it's Raymond Buckland, seriously. And, you know, there's other people that take the attitude of like, Raymond who? Fuck him. Oh my god, Raymond who? Fuck him. But you know what I mean? Like, this idea that, look, if this guy says that hexing means that you're not a witch, then nothing he has to say is of worth or is legitimate. It's kind of a form of moral absolutism, actually, which I don't really like. I feel I can agree with some things that some people say and not with other things that they say, and it can be okay. I think I went through a phase where it wasn't okay, and I was much more of an absolutist, and I was much more like straight down the line. Like, if you have these opinions, then your whole being is suspect to me. I'm definitely fucking done with that now, because I've found that I get really irritated when people do that to me. Like, I say one thing that they disagree with, or I'm not completely with them on something that they feel they need me to be with them on, and then it's just like their illusion of me is shattered. And I think to myself, how fragile and simplistic must your illusion of me be, that we've gotten to the point where we have one opinion that differs, and you're like, oh my god, I'm outie 5,000, I'm unsubscribing, I can't believe that you don't agree with me on this. What? I was basically in the camp of like, I don't agree with Raymond Buckland that if you do hexes you're not a witch, and I don't agree with Raymond Buckland that witches shouldn't publicise the fact that they're doing, you know, this big joint hex on Brock Turner, it was at the time. But at the same time, like, you know, Raymond Buckland has a lot of awesome ideas and has made a great contribution to this spiritual path, and, you know, he's got a great body of work behind him, and I want to hear what he has to say about other things, you know. It wasn't just a case of like, oh, you're saying that I cannot perform a hex and be a witch, well, you are fucking outright cancelled, sir. You are cancelled for life. I'm not really about cancelling people that easily, to be honest. Intergenerational tension when it comes to this kind of thing really interests me, because like I said, you know, there was a point where these people that are getting kind of stuffy and all up in their feelings about the younger generation were definitely getting up the noses of the generation before them, and there's always been that kind of antagonistic, like adversarial relationship between generations that are following a certain spiritual path. I think one of the main things that causes this tension between the older generation of pagans and witches and then the new generation who are much more social media savvy is just basically the degree to which social media has become so much of a thing. Generation Y were raised with technology in a way that I was not raised with technology. I was raised with technology in a way, obviously, that my mother and father were definitely not raised with it, and it's just gotten quicker and quicker and quicker, you know. So it's really kind of, it's something that there's definitely going to be a gap of misunderstanding about. The older people that weren't raised with all this technology, that obviously have learned how to be proficient in using it, and they publicise their businesses using it, and they connect with people using it, but they don't have that understanding of how ingrained into somebody it is to put their life on social media the way it is for kids now. So, you know, I think there's definitely that gap that is really nigh on impossible to bridge, in a way where somebody from an older generation watches a younger person putting their altars on Instagram and showing their rituals on Instagram and breaking down their spells and, you know, giving spell examples and stuff, and I can see how an older person would look at that and go, this is a little bit fucking much. And I can see how it would be confusing and perturbing, for sure, potentially. I think it can probably seem obnoxious sometimes, and also I think it can seem incredibly privileged, because, as Pagyptian rightly said, you know, a lot of people from the older generation, they put in a lot of the groundwork to be able to make it acceptable in different areas of the world to be a witch. And we've had a slow and steady kind of journey to the point now in the UK where in a lot of areas areas, and as Pagyptian rightly said, not in all areas and not in all situations, of course, but in a lot of areas it's pretty benign now to say that you're a witch. There are a lot of people who say, oh, I already know a witch, my mum's friend is a witch, I mean, you know, whatever. And there's a lot more openness and there's a lot more curiosity when you say you're a witch, as opposed to somebody kind of, you know, crossing themselves and being like, oh my god, don't hurt me, don't kill my crops. So the older generation putting in that groundwork, some of that groundwork, definitely could look at all these young upstarts just being so hyper fucking witchy all over social media and think, I don't know what they're thinking. I guess it's just an irritation. To me, the critiques that Pagyptian has read in books and stuff like that, and the kind of discourse that she's noticed going on about, you know, criticising the younger generation, I think a lot of that could really just be done internally. I really think that there is some shadow work to be done there for a lot of older people that are looking upon the young'uns, the up and comers, and disparaging them or feeling really shitty about them. I don't think that there always needs to be a vocalization of how people feel about like how the next generation are doing things necessarily, because your irritations are going to come from a place of great personal bias and from a place of not really understanding the framework that the younger generation are using, because their framework is just so fundamentally different to yours, and the way they express themselves is so connected to the internet in a way that you can never really understand, and I can probably never really understand. I understand it a lot more than someone from my mum's generation, you know, but essentially I think that when we put a kind of critique like this into a serious discourse and we put it into books and things like that, we start writing down that the younger generation are frivolous and they're just, you know, using it as a fashion statement, or they're not serious about it. I think we have to accept that there's a lot of our own personal bias coming into the equation there, and it's probably not appropriate for a serious critique that you can put in a book. It's more like you have to accept that as the older generation, things are getting up your fucking nose, things are changing faster than you can, you know, really keep up with, and you're like, what the fuck? And I'm not saying that to be patronising and say, oh, like, you know, the old people need to hang up their boots. I'm not saying that at all, you know. I'm saying that I think sometimes you have to look at your response to something and just own up and say, you know what, this is probably somewhat of an age thing and a generation thing, and it's probably actually not something that I can say with certainty that I know. I cannot say with certainty that I know that the younger generation do not have at all the same connection to the spirit of the craft as our generation did. I can't say that just because I find the way that they express their witchcraft to be obnoxious and needless and over the top and ostentatious and pretentious, and you know, I can't say that, you know, with certainty that these people aren't for real just because they are expressing themselves in a way that is so markedly different from the way that my generation have, and from the way that we actually could, from the way that we actually were allowed to. I would love to see more elders who've been doing this for a lot longer. I'd love to see them on YouTube. I'd love to see them writing blog posts. I'd love to see them. I'd love to see more of them. I'm always really interested in seeing older witches come into the community who've been doing it for a really long time and have decided to just start sharing now on YouTube, but actually, you know, they have a path that goes way back. I find that really interesting and exciting, and you know, I'm not getting any younger myself, so it's always really interesting to see perspectives from people who've been on the path a lot longer than me and have had a lot of different twists and turns, and they are probably kind of relating their path to the way that they are aging in years and the way that their wisdom is progressing, and I want to see that. I want to see so much more of that, and I do like seeing positive interactions between the generations in the spiritual community. I think it's fucking great, and I think we really need that, but I think there's definitely always going to be some tension, and where social media is concerned, that's really the biggest spanner in the works, isn't it? It's just this fact that the generation that are getting sniffy about the generation that are Snapchatting their rituals and shit just can't go there. They can't fully go there. They can't understand like why that is necessary, and it's gonna look crude and lewd. Crude and lewd and obscene and unnecessary, darling. Olivia Pagyptian said that she definitely has had her suspicions and her judgments with regard to people that she's been around or whatever, not being serious about their craft and seeing it more as a fashion statement than really a serious thing. It's something that actually sometimes you discern by mistake, really. You don't even mean to do it. You're not sitting around thinking, I'm gonna fucking judge this bitch now, and I'm gonna definitely rip into her practice and decide that she's not serious about it. She probably doesn't do anything at that fucking altar. It's all for show. It's not as conscious as that. It's just like, sometimes you just get a feeling about somebody and you're just like, well, I'm not really sure that they're taking it seriously, or I'm not really sure that I feel the warmth of their sincerity on this topic. And it's actually kind of it's accidental. It's just an accidental observation that you make, and you decide the extent to which that observation is given power. And that's something that I have recognized. I do not mind allowing myself to discern that somebody is more serious or less serious about the path, or more ethical or less ethical as a business owner, or whatever. But I think the extent to which I give that power, and the extent to which I allow it to colour my interactions with that person or engage with their content or whatever, that's my choice, and I kind of need to own that. And I always like to think it possible that I could be wrong about people. So even if I get a fairly strong feeling that something isn't quite groovy in the woodshed, I always just feel like, well, you know, there's a million different variables that could have brought me to that particular assumption or that particular belief. And I like to explore, you know, the reasons I may have reached that belief, but I definitely don't want to put a really hard line under it and say, this is my opinion of this person, because I recognise that, you know, I'm a complex, weird individual, and sometimes something that somebody does, or the way that they present their path or whatever, might hit me in a way that doesn't quite do it for me, and it doesn't quite like vibe with the way I would feel a sincere practice should be, or whatever. But I acknowledge that that could very much have something to do with me as well, and it's something for me to learn from. So I take it back to self. I know that's something I've said on the channel since the days of yore, but darling, I do take things back to self, and I would recommend that we all do that from time to time. It's very important. The younger generation that are very, very social media happy, and they're showcasing a lot of their practice online, and they're talking about it a lot online and stuff, I think that they will need to have a dialogue with themselves about, you know, the self-surveillance that can come up as a result of that, and have a dialogue with themselves about whether or not they actually want to expose that much, because sometimes it can just feel like it's the cultural norm to expose that much, and you really need to have a dialogue with yourself at some point on your journey about whether or not it feels right for you. Like, it doesn't matter what other people are doing. Does it feel right for you? Is it something that you want to continue doing? And lots of people have those dialogues with themselves, and I think that's useful and healthy. And what worries me a little bit about younger generations really kind of leaning into social media very early is that they're putting a footprint on the internet really early, and sometimes it's really fucking early, and obviously there are numerous problems with that and numerous reasons why I might be worried about that. But one of those reasons is that your path changes so fucking much, and in those early years, you know, you are normally an adolescent and you are growing into yourself and growing into your identity and stuff like that. I am so relieved that I didn't have the capability to put videos on the internet when I was exploring my path in 1998. Do you know what I mean? I'm so fucking relieved that I didn't have the ability to do that, and it wasn't even on my mind. It wasn't even on my radar. I think that's really lucky, and I do worry about you know, young witches coming onto the path and just making videos really early and wanting to maybe emulate people that they see in the community online that have a platform and talk about their path, and really just looking up to those older witches and being like, yeah, I want to showcase my path too. And it's so difficult to come from this point of view where you want a younger person to stop and think before they do that, because obviously as somebody that makes content and talks about their path online and stuff, I love it and I can understand the appeal in doing it. So it would be really weird for me to tell a younger person to, like, hey, cool your boots and maybe, you know, be very selective about what you expose regarding your craft, and let yourself lean into it and grow into it before you start talking about it and breaking it down and teaching it and, you know, splashing it all over the internet. I mean, because I can understand the desire to do that for sure, but yeah, I do worry about people not giving themselves a chance to just be goofy, unsure, witches that are just witching, you know, witchlings, basically just trying things. And I worry about people wanting to, like young people wanting to present their craft in a serious way and a considered way before they've even had a chance to really know what being serious and considered means, because it's just all new and they're still not quite a solidified, you know, identity in themselves and stuff. I just want people to have a chance to witch without, you know, having that fourth wall broken and people looking in and watching the witching kind of thing. So I do worry about that with the younger generation, not just with regard to witchcraft, but with regard to everything. I worry about their cyber footprint being something that comes along so soon these days, and not really just having the chance to curate more carefully their online footprint. Okay, so Pagyptian also mentioned the witchy fashion aesthetic and you know, the kind of dislike that some people have of the wearing of pentacles and, you know, fashion earring pentacles and pentacle print t-shirts and just witchy stuff, basically occult imagery. It comes and goes, you know, it comes around and it goes around. For anyone who pays attention to high fashion, I don't pay as much attention to haute couture and high fashion as I used to by a long way, but for anyone who pays attention to these things, it all really comes from the top down. So every once in a while, Jean-Paul Gaultier or who the fuck ever, Proenza Schouler, darling, will be like, I want to go for a witchy vibe, let's create a mood board which is very like, yeah, bring in some Waterhouse, bring in some goth stuff, you know, like plaster all that. I want a witchy show, and then that will trickle down and trickle down until it comes into the shops and everything like that, and suddenly everything's got fucking alchemical symbols on it and shit. And I think people get confused sometimes as to where this comes from, and sometimes it is informed by popular culture, it's informed by witchy shows and stuff like that, and people playing with the aesthetics that come from those mainstream things that have been enjoyed by a great many people. But very often it's really from the catwalks, and you know, that witchy aesthetic does the rounds. It did the rounds in the 80s, it did the rounds again in the 90s. It's just one of those things, and you know, it's definitely one that sticks, you know, the witchy aesthetic. And I have such a love-hate relationship with it. I have such a fucking love-hate relationship with it. It is ridiculous, because I don't want to be confined by it, and I don't want to be defined by it, and I don't want it to cheapen the depth of what the path can be. But at the same time, I love it, I'm into it, I find it thrilling, I find it exciting, I find it inspiring, so it's fucking annoying. And there's like, you know, some magazine sort of photo shoots, photo spreads that I've seen over the years that have really tuned into the witchy aesthetic, and it's like, you know, model in the woods with a fucking very far out hat on doing spells and looking up from an old book of arcane wisdom and, you know, all that kind of shit, candles and a fucking altar in the middle of the woods. And there is something about it that feels cheap and nasty to me. There is something about it that feels, I really don't want to say exploitative, because I do not feel exploited. I feel supremely privileged in my path. But it's just like, it's like a caricature of something that I actually do and that I actually am and I actually live. And I don't like that on some level, but on another level I do like it. So it's very confusing, and obviously this ties in with the fact that witch, the word witch, has this incredible sort of double meaning, where when we talk about witches, we're talking about people like me who are witches and neo-pagans, but then we're also talking about witches from fairy tales and folklore and mythology and stuff like that. So, you know, there's a double meaning, and you have to accept that. You've got to roll with that. You can't just say these images of witches are, you know, they're caricatures, they are fetishizations of what real witches are. It's like, no, hang on a minute. We share the word with a lot of other stuff, okay? It's not just us reclaiming. It's a linguistic reclamation, essentially. We are sharing the word with, like, witches from books and witches from folklore and, you know, witches from that kind of, you know, the hooked nose and the witchy conical hat and shit. We are sharing our use of the word with all of that stuff as well, and we do have to know that. But I do feel like, yeah, there's something about it that really irritates me, and there's something about it that I fucking love. Like, exactly like Pagyptian said, I like the fact that I can get hold of great big chunky pentacle earrings, and I like the fact that I can go on Killstar online and get a fucking hoodie that's got alchemical shit and, you know, stuff from grimoires all over it and whatnot. Like, I mean, it's beautiful. I love it. It's very pretty. It's an aesthetic that I do enjoy. But at the same time, I feel like when I wear it, it makes sense because I understand what it is, and I'm wearing it for a very kind of artfully done, consciously, you know, a conscious reason, if you will. And it's not to say that I judge other people when they do it, and I'm like looking at them going, I'm sure that girl is not pagan, I'm sure she's just wearing that because, you know, she found it on ASOS or whatever. I'm not judging or anything like that, but I have, in certain situations when I've seen, like I said, spread, you know, magazine layouts or kind of fashion sort of lookbooks on YouTube. A lot of lookbooks on YouTube around Halloween play with the witchy theme, and, you know, they might get cards and then have, like, you know, the dress from H&M and the matching. It's just like, I don't know, there's something about it that is weird at the same time, which is also strange to say because obviously the witchy aesthetic is not something that a lot of witches want to have anything to do with, you know. The witchy aesthetic as we would think of it now is not necessarily what a lot of witches look like, and it's not what they feed into or play into. I think it's less about the clothing. It's not necessarily like the flowing dresses and the jewellery and that I find is a caricature. It's more like the props and the way that things are set up, and the symbols as well. Sometimes it's like just a bit jarring to see alchemical symbols on a sort of sexy mesh top, and just, you know, just cause it's just there, just cause kind of thing. But at the same time, I'm a syncretist, and I like to throw things together and, you know, do whatever. But I'm not producing those things for mass consumption. Like, it's just for me and my path and what I'm doing. But I am definitely like rebellious with those kinds of things, and there is something for me about just taking things and just smashing them together like they make no sense. To me, there is something about just kind of taking things and just mishmashing them together. Not sure about for mass consumption, and I don't know, sometimes I love it, and I definitely have taken advantage of it, and I do enjoy it, and it is playful and all that. Sometimes I don't like it. It depends on the context, and it depends how I'm feeling, I guess, and all that kind of thing. Put it this way, I'm never in a million years going to go up to somebody in the street or at a festival or whatever who's wearing a pentacle on their t-shirt and say, excuse me, do you actually know what that means, or is it just for fashion? I'm never going to be that person. I am never, categorically never, going to be that person. One thing that Pagyptian said in her video is that a lot of us feel safe to express ourselves and really just enjoy sharing our paths because of the previous generations doing the work to create that sense of safety and openness. It's because of the people that have come before us, and I want to say a resounding yes to that. And I just want to thank both of these amazing witches in the community for making these videos that have made me think so much. And I think it's really funny that one video was 4 minutes long and the other video was, I think, 10 minutes long, and I've made this amount of long of a video about it. But can you expect anything else from me, really, honestly? And before I go, I just have to make the point that I'm actually wearing a necklace that I made myself, just talking about like the witchy aesthetic and stuff. I'm wearing a necklace that actually says priestess on it. Yes, I made my own witchy thing. I made my own witchy thing, darling. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and accompanying me as I was a rambling witch, and I would love to know what your opinions are on any of this stuff down below. And yeah, catch you on the flip side, baby cakes. Much love and blessed be. Mwah.